History happened everywhere. A random country and a random time with a topic pulled from the hat. Then we have a week for one of us to dive into the internet and find out everything they can. Welcome to... History happened everywhere. Hello, I'm Pete Goddard. This is Ryan Weir.
Hello.
This week it's been Ryan's turn to learn about the topics and tell me everything he's learned this week.
Yeah, that's right.
So how's it been?
Well, it's been an interesting one this week, and I'm really looking forward to telling you. There is just one thing. Should anything happen to me, I would quite like somebody, perhaps you, to just completely remove and destroy my laptop afterwards.
Internet history problems?
Yes, browser history is not looking great.
Okay, that's you can trust me. I will take care of that.
Good man.
Right, so let's remind ourselves what we're learning about this week.
Okay, let's move on to next week, and it's my challenge. So let's hit the Derzolator.
And the country is?
Vietnam.
And the time period is?
1985 to 1990. And the theme is sex. Sex in Vietnam from 1985 to 1990.
So Ryan, let's talk about sex.
Yeah, that's right. Every time we do this, and I have to recall what the things are, even though I've done the research and I've listened to this, I still think, have I got the dates wrong? I'm so insecure that I'm not 100% sure that I've just spent a week researching the wrong thing.
It's like a recurring nightmare, isn't it? It's like, no, that was not the topic.
It's when you turn around, you're like, what? No, it's like I've turned up to my exam and I've studied the wrong thing. Turned over the page and it's the wrong questions. Anything. Right, okay. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to start by asking you a question. Pete, how do you get sexy? Like, what gets you in the mood?
I like to turn the lights down low.
Ooh.
I'm usually alone.
Yeah.
And obviously pop Chrome open and see where it takes me.
Oh, I see. Get some alum gear to rub that in. Little callback there. Well, I'll tell you what. 3 decades of war. How does that sound?
That's not normally how I roll, but let's see where it takes us.
What about some international trade embargoes? How are you feeling about now? Are you feeling aroused?
Embargo.
Yeah.
The way you say embargo makes it sound sexy. Sexier than trade embargoes should be, I think.
Economic disaster.
Economic disaster?
Do you like economic disaster?
You're giving me some very mixed emotions right now, right?
What about restrictive communist ideals? How are you liking that?
That is strangely turning me on.
Yeah,
I don't think it should be.
Okay, all right. Let's crack on. All of those things might we're going to shadow over this podcast, but this is a fascinating one, Pete. I'm really enjoying it. I can't wait to get into this. So let's talk about location. Where is Vietnam? Vietnam is in Southeast Asia, east of India and south of China.
Okay, yeah, so India's the sticky down bit.
Yeah, to the right.
China's
of India,
the massive bit above that, and it's just tucked in between.
Tucked in there. It's right next to where Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Burma, as it used to be known, Malaysia, Thailand. It's all in that area right there. It is 128,000 square miles, which, as we do on History Happened Everywhere, it is half the size of France.
So that's interesting because India is famously massive, as is China, and then there's these relatively small countries.
Yeah, absolutely. It has 2,000 miles of Pacific coastline.
Nice.
Super long coast. It's narrow as a country and long, separated into essentially 2 sections, the north and the south, which will come into play later. The north is quite wide, about several hundred miles wide, and it sort of curves in that S shape into its middle bit where it becomes very narrow, just 31 miles across at its most narrowest point, and then it broadens back out into its southern point.
Imagine that's much wider. People could run the width of their country at its narrowest point.
Yeah, 31 miles. That's amazing, right? Okay, 80% of the country is dense tropical forest and/or mountains.
I mean, this is platoon country, right?
That's right.
People rummaging
Running
through the jungle,
forest, hiding in the forest, and so on. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, you get lost within several meters of entering it, and people do. So yeah, dense tropical forest or mountains. That's 20% of the country is made up of that. That's an awful lot. 20% is more urban. So cities, there are territories all over with more urban areas. Biggest areas, Hanoi, the capital city in the north. And then you've got Ho Chi Minh City in the southern area, which was previously Saigon and was the capital city in the south before the war. Population-wise, we're talking at the moment, so 2020 at the moment, 96 million people there across the whole of the country.
That's a bit more. What's the UK? 65 million. So you're looking at half as much again. Oh, my maths is failing me.
So an extra 30.
Okay, for a place that's half the size of
half the size of France. It's quite packed in very small areas. Remember, most of it, 80% of it is
not in that 30-mile wide bit, presumably.
Very little in that 30-mile wide. But back in 1985, the period we're looking at, you've got 61 million. So it's grown in the past 40 years by roughly 35 million people. So big expanse. So between the period we're looking at, 1985, 61 million. By 1990, it's grown by 6 million, so 67 million people living there. All right. Time-wise, we've just said 1985 to 1990 is what we're looking at. Cold War is continuing at that point, 1985. You've got oceanographer Richard Ballard, who is out looking for sunk nuclear submarines and discovers the Titanic at the bottom of the Atlantic.
Ah, excellent.
Yeah, so that happens in 1985. You've got 1986, Cape Canaveral. The Space Shuttle Challenger sets off and almost immediately erupts into a ball of flames, killing
Challenger.
all 7 of the astronauts on board.
Okay, Challenger. Yeah, okay. So the 80s, I was, just for the important points, I was 14.
14 years old?
Yeah.
Oh, bless you. I imagine you were a horrible 14-year-old.
I'm a horrible
person.
and always have been.
So nothing changes. What else is happening? So the United States and the Soviet Union get together and they decide, so Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan sit down and they sign a bit of paper to say no more nuclear weapons.
So we're Gorbachev era. So this is kind of the tail end of the Cold War.
Definitely tail end of the Cold War.
Perestroika's coming up. We've got a bit
happened.
Oh, Perestroika's happened. Okay.
It's happened at this point. So yeah, there is. So the Cold War is coming to its close. Berlin Wall falls, 1989. So, the two dividing parts of Germany rejoin. And in terms of sort of culture and movies, Back to the Future. This is the era of Dirty Dancing, of the Oprah Winfrey Show starting, and Star Trek, The Next Generation, boldly entering our TV box sets.
I like the idea that there's a little-known presenter called Oprah Winfrey.
Right, yeah. Whatever happened to her?
No, well, she could have been something,
She could have done. She just worked a little harder. Okay, so let's get a bit more into detail. We've talked about the location, we talked about the time. Let's go back a little bit in time because we need to talk about sex in Vietnam. We need to understand a little bit more about where the country is, where the people are at, the psychology, and what's happening at that period of time. So let's go back a decade. The United States have been at war in Vietnam for 10 years. They've been helping the South Vietnam, fighting the more communist North. South is more capitalist, and the US decides has been helping them fight the war against the Northern communists.
This is part of the domino theory of foreign aggression. This was when basically the USSR was fighting America through the medium of other people.
Right, yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. And actually, we'll come across a bit of that later. But 1974, Richard Nixon sends in a couple of people into the Watergate Hotel to steal information, basically about his opponent's election challenge.
Standard practice.
Called totally fine, and nothing wrong there, not a crook at all. And he ends up resigning after the scandal is made public. He leaves. Gerald R. Ford becomes the new US president, and he settles in and immediately rules out any further involvement in Vietnam. Just withdraws all the troops. There's a mass evacuation, and the South goes, well, wait, what? And the North immediately just invades Saigon. The South surrenders, the Southern government surrenders, and that's pretty much the end of the war in Vietnam. There's a total death toll. It's not complete, still don't know, but it's somewhere between 1 and 4 million people.
Because people frequently talk about the scar that the Vietnam War left on the psyche of America.
Yeah.
Which is trivial compared to the loss that was experienced by the Vietnamese. It always slightly irks me when people talk about it as if it were an American war.
Absolutely.
It was conducted in Vietnam with Vietnamese people largely.
Yep.
The Americans were there and it was very significant for them, but it always annoyed me when it seems to be always presented through an American lens.
Yeah, and there is the immediacy of having, napalm thrown at you and your countrymen dying and your friends and family being murdered. But the lasting effects, the Americans used herbicides, so just completely neutralized the ground. So a lot of their ground became completely useless, and that lasted for years. Right? The lasting effects are huge. And I guess that's probably the same with many wars, it lasts. It's not like it's just forgotten within a short period of time. But in this case, it certainly hangs around for a while. And so we'll see the shadow of the war linger for certainly a little while longer at least. Right, so the North are now in the South, and they're rounding up all the collaborators, as they called them. So the South Vietnamese, 300,000 of them are sent to re-education camps, so to perform hard labour, and they stay there for years. It's not like you're there for 3 months, you're there for almost a decade.
Just to refer back, I thought circumcision camp seemed bad. Re-education camp, substantially worse.
Sounds better, re-education camp, but I think substantially worse in terms of, the effects. So the North and the South, they unify in 1976 and they create the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. So one country now. Saigon, the southern capital city, as we said, is now renamed to Ho Chi Minh City, Ho Chi Minh named after the communist leader who sort of founded the party. The US, who have left just the year before, sort of abandoning the South Vietnamese, they've also sort of cut off, obviously, the funds that they were paying. They paid billions into the South Vietnamese economy while they were there. That's now gone. The US now lead the charge against a trade embargo against against the whole of the Vietnamese and Vietnam from much of the world. So they are now cut off internationally. It becomes almost instantly one of the world's poorest countries. So fun times. The communist government decides, well, we're going to need a plan. And so they come up with a 5-year growth plan.
That is the most communist thing I can think of.
5-year plan.
We're going to need a 5-year plan.
Yeah. Well, that's what they called it. They called it the 5-year plan. And it was terrible. I guess in hindsight, we can say that maybe they didn't know that at the time. But it devastates the economy even further than it actually was. So here's some of the things they did. Anything that was privately owned in the South, so farms, factories, fishermen, everything now becomes state-owned. So everybody's kicked off. They bring down leaders from the North to run these businesses, the industry, the agriculture. Cash is removed. Everything is now traded via food vouchers or for services, wages, salaries included. So no one's got money anymore.
One wonders if at that point your food voucher just simply becomes a form of cash because it's a medium of exchange, right?
I guess it is, yeah. And at that point, the government also decides that actually there are too many people all living together in sort of the urban areas, and they want to start to redistribute people. So there is a population redistribution that goes on. They have a plan for it. They've decided that they are going to move 44 million people by 1980. Given this is only 4 years away, this is their plan, with an additional 10 million people by the mid-1990s. They're just going to move everyone around. They're going a big old shuffle. And that means transferring northerners to the south, southerners to the north. It means getting the army to just waylace to a million hectares of like jungle, virgin land, and building new economic zones for people to live in.
So they're like just want to build new towns? What's the thinking here?
Thinking is just to combat food shortages. I've got too many people in one area. If we redistribute them so that they're spread around the country a bit more. Remember, it's only 20% of the country is habited at that point. If we can make it a bit broader, and I think they wanted 200,000 people within a certain section. No more than that. That way, they'd be able to deal out food resources more suitably rather than it all being concentrated in one area. So that starts to happen, and over 9 years, 6 million people are actually moved and then just relocated and dropped in rural areas. So the country's urban population basically is just decimated, right? It just declines completely. And with nothing to sell and with no money to spend, people just start getting desperate. And what happens at this point, 2.5 to 3 million people just flee the country. They just become migrants and try and get across the border. They head off to Thailand, to Cambodia, and they often do this cramming themselves into boats, which then capsize. They were attacked by Thai pirates who basically just robbed and raped them or just murdered them. And then through Cambodia, like through the minefields, being literally blown apart or trying to find some sort of new life for themselves.
So we're talking about the Vietnamese boat people at this point, right?
We are. Well, those, some of them are the boat people, yeah.
Which for me, being of an age, I remember in sort of the Blue Peter programs where they were talking about these sort of human crises of these people leaving that country.
Okay.
And on a personal note, a family of mine were Vietnamese boat people. His family fled Vietnam.
Wow, through one of the boats?
Yeah.
Wow, I'm pleased to hear that they survived, because a huge number of them didn't.
So I don't want to get it wrong, but there was a point where they landed, I think, and they were in camps. They were being held in camps as asylum seekers, effectively, and some people were holding out for certain countries to take them in.
Yeah.
And this guy, the British came, and this guy's family took them in.
Okay.
That's great. And then I think someone else was holding out for Germany or something.
Okay.
But it didn't happen. They died.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I'm so sorry to hear that, man.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I mean, it's sobering. In many of these situations where, we talk about migrants, people escaping and literally fleeing their country, it's hard to imagine what that might actually be like, to give up everything, to leave behind people that you love and that you care about. Because the alternative is that you'll die. It's just... it's just so far removed from where we are, and yet it's so close. It could happen as it happens here within a period of 3 or 4 years.
The thought of just the way that the tide of history can turn against you personally. So you're a middle class or lawyer or whatever you might be.
Yeah.
And then it's gone. Pol Pot's arrived and decided that the intellectuals are to be, that's Cambodia, but the intellectuals are to be
removed.
And you go from this thing that seems so permanent and it can suddenly turn, which has a great deal of resonance in a time when it seems like fascism is not as repulsive to as many people as one would hope. It's appalling. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah. You mentioned Pol Pot there. At the same time, roughly the same time this is all happening, the Cambodian government, run by Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge, decides that they're going to invade some of the border villages in Vietnam. And so they step in, start massacring the villagers that are living there. The Vietnamese military responds, and it invades Cambodia and removes them from power almost instantly. They overwhelm the Cambodian government and they install a new pro-Vietnam government called the People's Republic of Kampuchea. And they stay there to make sure that that stays in place for 7 years. So pretty successful, given the economic struggles that they've been during the war that they've just suffered. The military is still really strong. What it does do, though, is it pretty much pisses off the Chinese. The Chinese are not happy about having this military force right on their border. And so the Chinese start to have several incursions into Vietnam as well. This is northern Vietnam, testing the ground.
It's a bit of a turnaround because they were supporting the North Vietnamese in the Vietnam War. And then they're like, these guys are getting too big for their boots.
Exactly right, yeah. And bear in mind that you might wonder getting too big for their boots, but they really were. They were the fourth largest army in the world, the Vietnamese. It's an enormous army. 30% of the national income that Vietnam had went towards defense. So you can see how from China's perspective, well, actually, these are people we need to keep in check. So the situation is, by the beginning of the 80s, Vietnam is internationally isolated. They have this huge hostile neighbor to the north, the Chinese. They are running out of money, and so they have to find ways of making money, and so they go to the Soviet Union, they go to Russia, and they say, we need some aid, we need some support. And that's what they do, quite happily. They give them $3 billion by 1982.
How big is the suitcase that is needed to hold $3 billion?
That's a pretty big briefcase, right? Imagine the size of the check that's to write out. Yeah. But what that does, because they had to take that money, because there was no other option, it then hampers any attempt to reestablish sort of diplomatic relations with the US.
There are parallels here with Cuba, had the same problem, I believe, which was that when the Americans moved out, essentially, or were booted out by Castro, who was a communist, he also found himself isolated, and who's he going to go to for help? The USSR.
Right.
He goes to the USSR, and then there's this self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, now the United States really sees you as being in bed with the enemy, and then this cycle continues.
But what else was your option, right? Yeah, exactly. So 1981. We're heading into the 80s now, and there is a new 5-year plan. So the previous 5-year plan, which wasn't a tremendous success and most people hated, is now dead, and we need a new 5-year plan. So that's announced.
So to recap, that went badly. Let's do another one.
Let's do another one. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, I guess. I hope you've got a 5-year plan.
I have no plans whatsoever. It's going great so far.
Barely got a 5-day plan. Right. But what happens is that 5-year plan is announced. And there's a group of rebel politicians who are like, you know what, I think we've had enough. Particularly the government at the time was super antiquated and old and elderly.
That has always seemed to be a communist thing where they have these incredibly old people running the show.
Yeah, the three people who are at the top, they had a combined age of 270.
Wow.
So, they start to formulate a plan to replace the old government, which is what happens. 1986, the government is replaced. So with the new government in place, they start to move towards a more capitalistic market economy, known as doi moi, or renovation. It now allows citizens to run their own businesses. So where everything was state-run before, you can now have farmers running their own farms and actually making money again. And funnily enough, the Vietnamese economy starts to grow.
So they didn't really learn their own history then, did they? Communist history, at least, because this is exactly what happened to Lenin.
Right.
Lenin was a dogmatic communist, and then he realized when he was actually running a country, it wasn't going very well, and he loosened the shackles a bit, and things looked up. It's almost as if they refused to learn anything.
Yeah, I guess so. The economy starts to grow. International public awareness starts. So you've got Apocalypse Now, which has been released, Francis Ford Coppola's film. Then that's followed by Platoon by Oliver Stone. You've got Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. You've got Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams. You've also got a series called Vietnam, which is a 10-part miniseries made by the Australians, starring Nicole Kidman, which I didn't know about. But it tells the story of an Australian family called the Goddards. Yeah, that's why I mention it.
Our people.
Yeah, your people. And they become basically involved in the Vietnam War, and it tells their story. Good Good morning, Vietnam.
Sorry, Ryan. Sorry, I have to stop you there. The lawyers have been in touch. They've said we can't do Good Morning Vietnam. It's copyrighted or whatever it is.
I can't say the words Good Morning
You can't
Vietnam.
say that. We can do something like it. We can't do that.
Okay, well, like, can I say Good Morning Vienna? Or
Yes,
Good Morning...
Yeah, Vienna's fine. Vienna's fine. It doesn't really work with the podcast, though.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I mean, I get that, because, like, this podcast whole thing is about Vietnam.
Yeah. Can we do Good Afternoon Vietnam?
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
Okay,
All
try
let's
that.
Okay. Good afternoon, Vietnam!
Yeah, that doesn't work. I'm sorry.
At this point, 1990s, is when contemporary Vietnam starts, as we know it, the US lifts its trade embargo, and you start to see foreign companies like Nike, Coca-Cola, FedEx, those kinds of companies rushing in to set up shop, literal sweatshops, as we know. That's the background to the period that we're going to be talking about.
So help me out here. The war, there's been decades of war, but things are starting to look up.
It's right at that point. So this is one of its darkest times. The economy's still poor, but things are starting to improve.
Okay, so
that's kind of where we
There's
are.
a glimmer of light on the horizon.
Absolutely. After a long time of darkness.
Problems with the Chinese are resolved. There's no current war, which is amazing because that's the first time for 30 years.
Yep.
That's where we're at.
Right, so let's talk about sex. Let's talk about sex.
Baby, let's talk about you and me.
Let's talk about all the good things and the good things that may be. Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about eating.
That was alarmingly better than we have any right to.
Well, we have to listen back
expect.
and listen to it.
That's true. All right, Ryan, I would like to talk more about sex and less about war, if possible.
Yeah. Wouldn't we all?
I suspect the Vietnamese were feeling much the same at this point.
All right, let's talk about family planning.
Oh,
we're not gonna get into the kinky stuff straight away. I got to hold that stuff back. This is called foreplay.
Family planning as foreplay.
So 80% of people are living in the rural areas. Okay, and they've got essentially very traditional, ancient attitudes towards marriage, sex, relationships. Overall, there is this overarching belief that the prosperity of the nation is tied to basically the happiness and the productivity of the people. So the more people you've got, the happier they are, the better your nation is. Right? So that's what they're trying to achieve. And they do that through having large families. It protects the family lineage, so it continues. It's also financial security as well. So, make sure that if you've got enough sons and daughters all earning money, you're going to be okay.
This is a typically rural outlook, isn't it?
It kind of is, yeah. I wouldn't say it's an Asian thing. I'd say it's just a rural thing. Yeah.
It's people to work the fields.
Exactly. Large
someone
families.
to look after you in your dotage.
That's right. So large families, average is 4. And the focus is on having sons, male offspring.
Yeah, I think that's fairly typical.
Yeah. There is an expression that is to have one son is to have. To have 10 daughters is not to have.
Oh, it's a bit rough on the daughters, isn't it?
It gets rougher, I would say. So let's just...
All right. I'll strap in.
Strap in for
Take
that
me
one.
on this journey, Ryan.
Even though there's this focus on having boys, females outnumber males by 3% in 1985.
Is this because of the
Just more girls?
war, or
Could be. We can surmise. Let's surmise.
I'll surmise that. Let's surmise that.
All right.
Let's surmise.
It's to do with the war then. Having a large family is fine because they can just grow their own food. They don't have to rely on anyone else to be able to support that family. So you can have a family that's as large as your food. But in the urban areas, housing, unemployment, it's a real problem. They can't support 4 people. You can't have that same level of, we'll just let nature decide. So in 1984, there is a voluntary family planning campaign that kicks in where they're like, hey, guys, how about we don't have such big families? Here, use prophylactics, use condoms. And everyone goes, yeah, nah, it's fine. We're going to carry on as we were. And so in 1987, there is a new law that kicks in. And it's around marriage, it's around birth control, and it's obligatory. You must be 22 to be a first-time mother. Previously to that, it was 19. You must only have 2 children per couple, and those children must be 5 years apart.
5 years apart.
5 years apart. And so everyone just goes, yeah, we're not doing that. Young people are going to fall in love. They're going to fall in love early. They're going to have sex. They're going to get married. And no matter what law you're going to set in place, that's going to happen. And so in the face of penalties, which weren't, I mean, I guess they weren't trivial, but you're not doing time, but it's like pay cut, you won't get a bonus, and no promotions. So it all seems tied to your work.
Right. But as crimes go, that is about as detectable as they come, isn't it? The belly thing that's happening here. Is that,
just eating a lot of...
Is that it? Rice. Is it? Because are you pregnant? I'm just asking.
No.
No, but I will need some time off in the near future.
And what happens is that nothing really changes. The same birth rate continues. So between 1985 and 1990, you got 2 million live births.
I love the way that an entire nation takes a fairly serious law and treats it like a speed limit. They're like, nah, I mean, that's just a guideline.
I think that was the case. And I think that was why the voluntary thing didn't take off. Like, they started with the voluntary thing of, hey, guys, look, come on, we should do this collectively. We should all just agree that, we should only have 2 kids and they should be 5 years apart and 22 years old and all these things. But even the authorities were just like, look, we're not gonna enforce that. So no one took it seriously outside of the government.
I have a vision in my head of a sort of Vietnamese Dominic Cummings going, well, I mean, I've got 5 children 6 months apart, even though that's physically impossible. But you guys, you really need to slow down. That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
I don't think that's even Dominic Cummings. I think that's probably any chief of staff or across the world. It's one rule for one and not for the other.
Boom.
Mặt hồ lấp lánh in trời biếc, bồng bềnh mây trôi về xa xôi.
Let's get back to sex. So traditional lifestyles. So you're out in the rurals, living in little villages. It's intensely family oriented. You've got 3 generations living under one roof. That's just the norm, right? Most people have got 3 generations living there. They have this weird double standard. I say weird, like this doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. But women are expected to remain virgins until marriage. Meanwhile, men quite happy they're allowed to go off and have sex as much as they can. In fact,
I support that.
I don't support that, Pete. I think that's terrible. I'm going to edit that in. I think you're a terrible man.
Look, I can do what I want, but other people can't. That seems reasonable.
Are you Dominic Cummings? Is that what you're saying? Right. So, young men, it's encouraged. It's considered manly, in fact. Fathers sometimes take their sons to brothels to increase their appearance as a stud.
I don't have a terrifically close relationship with my father.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how I would have dealt with a
14-year-old you being taken to a brothel.
I mean, I caddied for him at golf once. That was awkward, to be honest.
Caddying for him in sex probably would be
so. I mean, which I'll pick a club for him, but I'm not going to pick a prostitute.
Well, it's the other way around. He'd be picking one for you.
That's much worse.
Okay, so girls must remain sacred, retain their virginity.
Except for the ones in the brothels, presumably.
Yeah, but that's mainly because men, it seems, are just reluctant to marry a virgin. That's really the only reason. It's not a religious reason. It's just men don't want to marry someone who's not been used. They want a new car. They want a new iPhone, fresh off the line. They don't want anything used. Sadly, even the case after rape. You're a marked woman if you've had sex pre-marriage.
So that's an attitude that persists to this day. I was reading in the news, I can't remember where it was, but somebody who said something appallingly similar to that, even this week. So
yeah, I think it's common. But it doesn't end there. Giving birth to a daughter, you are considered that you've got a sexual dysfunction. Like if you're impotent, that's your sexual dysfunction as a woman if you have a girl. Even though it seems like you might need a woman at some point to have more kids.
I think that's kind of the thing that's always been overlooked is that you kind of need one of each.
Yeah.
to keep things going.
Yeah, you kind of do. And also, the wife is considered the backbone of the family. This is the other thing, right? Once you get married, suddenly everything goes your way. You are really, she controls the man. This is interesting. So the polite name for a wife, you're going to call her the noitro.
That's like her indoors.
Interior helper. That's exactly what it means. Her indoors. Interior helper. She helps. She's inside. Her indoors. There you go.
Oh, my Lord.
Nothing changes no matter where
seriously,
you are.
It's like, oh, these cultures, they're not like us.
The not so polite version is noitung. Noitung means, and I'm, again, mispronounces. I think this should just be a general rule for this podcast, is that we're never going to be able we don't know how to pronounce stuff.
We're so sorry all the time.
All the time for everything. So the not so polite version is noitung, which means the general of the interior. Yeah, so militarized version of your own household. Or, which I quite like this one, but this is like the worst one, is sutu, meaning lioness.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
But that's bad.
You want a wife who's a lioness? Apparently not. That's not. In fact, if you have a sutu, your wife is a sutu, a lioness, you can claim membership to a club called the Hoi Sovo, which means the Society of Men Who Fear Their Wives. Now, I don't know whether or not that's an actual club or it's just like, oh, I belong to the...
I like to think they've got a club's and
right,
somewhere
just
you
sit
can
around
go
like,
and go.
oh my God.
So what brings you here? I'm just scared.
I can't go home.
I'm scared. I
I'm scared.
didn't do the dishes. There's going to be problems when I come home. So just give me another whiskey and I'll worry about it later.
Yeah, with your little badge on. Anyway, affairs, it happens in the rural. It tends to happen less, it seems, in the rural areas, mainly because women don't get the chance to hang out with men socially. They're not placed on that ladder, right? So the only men that they would really see on a day-to-day basis is sort of their immediate relations, so father, son, people that provide them services. But for men, extramarital sex seems kind of fine. 40% of men are having nookie with other women. They even have an expression for it. Rice 6 days a week. Noodle soup on the 7th.
So that simultaneously makes me hungry and sad.
That's how I eat all the time. Going to McDonald's and I'm hungry and sad. Feed me. That's why they call it a Happy Meal.
You end with this sort of feeling of emptiness and loneliness inside.
Still. Okay, so same sex, homosexuality, out in the rurals, it's not a big deal. It's never been criminalized in Vietnam, but it's just not really discussed, which means I don't have a tremendous amount to talk about on this because there's just really not much to research about it. It exists, it happens, they're kind of okay about it. The age of consent is 16, regardless of gender or sexual orientation.
So that's quite encouraging, isn't it? It's that it is so ordinary that it is not highly documented, right? You don't write down that the grass is green. You don't write down that men were really having relations with men and women were having relations with women.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah,
I think that the lack of information is almost a real positive there.
Yeah, I think so. It just doesn't seem to be culturally a problem. So let's go to the urban areas. So that's sort of the more traditional side. Urban things are starting to loosen up a little bit, and starting to get a bit more Western in culture, by which I mean sex before marriage is happening. It's more common. It's still frowned upon, but it happens and everyone's kind of just don't talk about it. Urban areas, everybody's crammed in, small space, small apartments and things. So there's little space if you're living with your family as a young person to get down with your loved one. So parks at night, everyone runs down to the park on their little mopeds or whatever. And it becomes like the popular hotspot, the little lovers' lanes, these little boulevards, tree-lined boulevards or parks. There's one in Hanoi called Than Ninh, which supposedly means young people. So the couples will turn up on their bikes, they'll sit under the trees, they'll go out in these little swan-shaped pedalos out onto the lakes. And at 8 o'clock in the evening, the street lights go out. It seems like this unwritten agreement between the electric authority and the young people themselves, because the lights come back on at midnight.
I love the idea of a sympathetic parky with a dimmer switch. It's kind of
going,
it's all right, guys. I got your back, guys.
I was young once.
I understand. Why do you think the pedalos are swans?
Yeah. I think that's probably on my list of things I haven't done, actually. Sex in a pedalo. In a swan. Sex with a swan. No, that's done that. That's done.
Sex with a swan in a pedalo. Is that what you haven't done? This is getting very specific, Ryan.
It's very specific. My sexual taste is very specific. In the morning, in these parks, you're going to want to watch out. There are used condoms everywhere. There is newspaper and wooden planks all over the floor, which they're using for bedding.
It's so romantic, isn't it?
There's this one little news story I found from 1986 of a 9-year-old boy who ran up to an authority figure, I guess a policeman, I guess that means, is saying that there was a man in the park being breastfed by a woman.
So sweet. And the park is like, yeah, that's why we did the light, kid.
Go to bed. Shut up. So,
yeah, but wading through condoms the next day seems like a rough business.
Yeah, you want to watch out. So yeah, 2/3 of women wait a year though. A year and a half, sorry. So 2/3 of women...
for the park?
Well, in a way. So if you start dating somebody, it's common in 1985 for the girl to wait a year and a half before they'll have sex.
That's kind of the 3-date rule really stretched out,
for
isn't
a
it?
very long time, yeah.
I assume they were dating more than the 3 times. They're like, I'm going to meet you in January, then once more in November, then probably next February, boom, we're going at it.
That's right. Well, except they don't tend to initiate. Women don't tend to initiate. It tends to be the guy. So that lends me to believe that it's kind of, I guess, the guy that's waiting that long. But women don't talk about initiating, and they don't talk about birth control. They're worried about losing the man's respect. So it's all about waiting for the guy to say it. I guess they would probably say no, though, if they initiate too soon, perhaps. Don't know. There is a growing trend at this point for young men looking for women who are just sort of satisfied with companionship. Which is quite sweet, really. They're not looking for sex on a regular basis. They're just looking, perhaps, sex just for kids. I guess they're happy. I guess there's 2 things there. Either they are wanting to, perhaps they're homosexual and they just want to be seen to have a wife and kids, or perhaps that they're happy with a lifestyle of having sex with lots of women.
Okay, so it's like, Swan Pedalo? No, I just want to watch Bake Off.
So let me run this past you, Pete. Pete, are you married yet? How would you answer? Be yes or no, right?
No.
Right, so you'd say yeah or no. Okay. They don't ask that question. They ask it in a different way. So grammatically, they change it. So they go from "Are you married yet?" to "Have you married yet?" The assumption being that you will get married, rather than right. And the response isn't yes or no. It's already or not yet. There is no.
Oh.
So, have you married yet, Pete?
Not yet.
That's right. That's the answer.
But also already.
So in the cities, adultery, it happens. Basically, if you're unhappy in marriage, if you're sexually unfulfilled, or you're just attracted to another person, any of those reasons seems to be your good game and legitimate reasons enough to go sleep with somebody else.
Podcast idea. Adultery happened everywhere.
I'm up for it. That sounds fun. See, the interesting thing there is that the culture is different to sort of our Western culture, where we have the guilt of, oh God, I shouldn't be sleeping with this person. I'm with somebody else. What if I will get found out? Their culture isn't about guilt. It's about shame. So you can have relationships with somebody else, and that, as long as you don't get found out, as long as it doesn't get talked about, as long as you're not bragging about it, It's kind of cool. You're fine. It's the shame of being called out on it.
I wonder if there's elements of the French influence there.
Yeah, could well be. The colonial French back in sort of 19 whatevers. Yeah, could easily be.
So basically...
Are you saying that's what the French do then?
Well, supposedly they're a bit more... Having a mistress is a bit more part of life, but the thing you do is make sure that it's not talked about.
Right, you just do it and keep it quiet, and
right.
That's the end of it. Yeah, could well be. But there is a step change. This hasn't always been the case, as I discovered. It turns out, 19th century, really frowned upon. Any man who has sex with the wife of their master would be treated as a slave and punished with strangulation.
That's a very severe punishment.
Yeah, not death by strangulation.
Oh, just to get
punished with strangulation.
So I guess
a bit. Just slap my wife.
Well, maybe you have for certain kinks, that might be considered a bonus.
Yeah, I think that's terrible. Honestly, I think that's the worst one. Women get away with a lot easier, right? Basically, in that period, so 19th century, if a woman's found guilty of adultery, there's this one case here where she was thrown into the air by a specially trained elephant, which would tramples her to death.
Wow.
I'd go for the strangulation.
But I also see it from the elephant's perspective. It's like, this is great game. I'm doing what I was trained to do.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
I don't blame the elephant in that.
Right.
No one was blaming the elephant. Before we move off of the sexy times with the locals, there's just one other thing that I do want to talk about, and this just caught my eye. So there is this philosophical tradition of Taoism. You aware of that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's basically the respect of the ancient doctrine of passivity, avoiding an active life. So, do nothing and everything will be accomplished simultaneously. Again, it's not religion, it's a philosophical way of life. They are encouraged to have intercourse. So even though you'd think being passive you wouldn't, but you're encouraged to have intercourse, but without ejaculating. And this is because intercourse represents the two sides of yin and yang. Okay, so the aim is to build up the yin, but retain yang through not ejaculating. And at the same time, what this does is gives you enough time to make the woman orgasm, which gives off her yin, her cum, which then strengthens the man. This was pretty common in the 1800s. There's this one story which I did find, I did want to read this out to you, where these Taoists at the time saw this practice of having sex but not ejaculating as perhaps not strong enough for them to have a longer life. So what they did was they would hire a young man and a woman, they would watch them have sex, and then they would drink their sexual secretions. So here's the actual story. This is the quote that I found. No. Let me read this to you.
Night out so far. I'm in. Sign me up.
Let me read this to you. All right. So the old celadon is accompanied by a strong servant who copulates with a woman in his presence and then retires. When once the agent is retired, well and duly paid, the old debauchee is left alone with the woman who is still resting upon the field of battle. Then the man approaches and eagerly receives in the liquid which runs ex vulva feminae. There you go. Thoughts?
Sort of turned on and horrified in equal measures. I certainly don't fancy a drink.
Yum, yum, yum. All right, let's move into prostitution.
No, wait, I've not completed my conversations about that last thing. I mean, is it like in a shot glass or how?
I guess you've got to scrape it up.
You're
or
drinking
something.
from sauce? What's the deal here?
Sauce.
Are you lapping from the original stream? I don't know.
Vietnam, like I guess many of its neighbouring countries, somewhat sort of tagged with this association with prostitution.
Hugely influenced by the Vietnam War films, I think. Specifically the I Love You Long Time classic trope if you will.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of films where it portrayed prostitution as being big. Well, and and rightly so, because it was. Comes to the war, sex industry just goes absolutely nuts. US servicemen are sitting around. These are the young guys that are, in many cases, drugged off the head, looking for a good time to get away from the horrors of the war. It's 300,000 sex workers at its peak. That's a lot of women and men, I guess, servicing these GIs that are there. Post-war, the communist government decides it's going to just eliminate pornography and prostitution. It says, that's not what we agree with. We're going to get rid of it entirely. And so all brothels are closed and all prostitutes are sent to go and work elsewhere in the fields or whatever.
Yeah, I was going to say, also on the plus side, you're getting moved to...
Yeah, around all over anyway. Exactly. So of the of those prostitutes, 14,000 of them were sent to those re-education centres we talked about earlier for hard labour. By 1985, though, the government claims prostitution is eradicated. Hooray! They have a little party.
They do claim that.
Turns out, not really eradicated. By 1990. Vietnam still has 40,000 approximately prostitutes and 1,000 brothels, which is a drop from the 300,000, but those are the ones that are claimed here, and I suggest that perhaps that's not the case. And there's other evidence I've been reading that suggests pretty much most hotels and bars still had prostitutes working within them. So I think that the government may not have succeeded in their 5-year plan to eradicate prostitution from Vietnam. One of the things that came from that that period of time is that 50,000 children, approximately, were born to prostitutes where their fathers were the US servicemen. These children were born into a world where they weren't wanted, they were outcast, and in many cases severely mistreated. They were made homeless, many of them, abandoned to live in essentially slums. They were referred to as the bui doi, which means dust of life.
Sorry, for listeners, I made a face.
You did make a face, yeah. Not great for podcasting, but I'll do an impression of it. It goes like this.
Yeah, that was it. That was the face.
So, referred to as bui doi, dust of life, which I find so poetic and just disturbing. It sort of horrifies me. I don't know why, but dust of life. It's just horrible. Children would use the slur Americans with 12 assholes to refer to these children. Apparently it rhymes in Vietnamese. In of itself, it's not a great slur, is it? Americans with 12 assholes, but apparently in Vietnamese...
If I were in my playground and someone went, you're an American with 12 assholes, I think my first reaction would be...
To laugh?
Yeah, and then followed by, what?
What? Say what?
You're going to have to explain that one to me. But I'm not as offended as you think I might be.
Well, they were, and it was a rough ride for these kids. Worse so for the children of the black US servicemen. They had it twice as bad, it seems. So these kids grow up, and they don't refer to themselves as Vietnamese. They were never considered Vietnamese. They don't see themselves that way, so they consider themselves American, or they consider themselves Amerasian.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the term Amerasian. And in 1987, the US hears about this. I mean, I'm sure they've been hearing about it before, but they decide to give $500,000 to the Ho Chi Minh City Residential Center for Amerasians. And they then fly in. They start to offer visas by literally the tens of thousands to these children. And basically many of them, about 30,000, get resettled to the States. With alongside 80,000 Vietnamese relatives as well. So I guess their mothers or like anyone else that's related to them. Those kids are resettled, and we hope that they have a better life than they were having. So sex workers in 1985. There are a few reasons why, and I think they're pretty common reasons why women turn to prostitution. I say women, mainly women. There are male prostitutes as well, but mainly women. Some of the reasons that are given, they live in rural areas and there's few opportunities. Uneducated, so they can't get any work. Low wages and doing anything else, picking rice or whatever.
And this is a song that we're familiar with today, right?
Oh, this is what I mean. Yeah, I think it's pretty common throughout. Yeah, conflicts, abuse by husbands, boyfriends, family, friends, trying to get away from that. And in general, from the research that I'm seeing, most of these prostitutes are claiming that they're better off working in brothels than they are living in their village, in the life that was expected of them. 42% of prostitutes are between the ages of 18 to 25, so the majority. 13% under the age of 18. Yeah. Well, bear in mind, age of consent was 16. So, let's hope that it was above the age of 16. Prostitutes tend to work in groups of 2 to 5 women. It's usually for protection. They'll pick one area and they'll stay there between a few months to several years before they then move on to a different area. They'll usually have a man there to protect them. It's usually referred to as their boyfriend or their burut. Anal sex isn't very popular. It tends to be something that the older prostitutes will do. On average, prostitute will have sexual contact about 23 times a month, but it can be up to 40 or 50 times.
40 or 50 times a month.
Yeah. Now, the words here are sexual contact, so I'm not 100% sure whether that just means, per act or per client. I'm not really sure.
You can just run around patting people on the bum. Go,
I guess
yes,
so.
that's me 40. I've done it. I've done my numbers for the month.
Clocked in, clock out. Yeah. One thing I did read about some of the male prostitutes is that many of them will undergo surgery to put small metal pellets along the length of their penis, just under the skin, anywhere between 2 to 10 of these pellets, which apparently creates a special pleasure in the female. Thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, that's a really good question, Ryan. I'm glad you asked that of me. I
have some.
Wow.
You want to show us?
It's like a bag of gravel down there.
Ribbed for her pleasure. Gross. So clients are called Kak Lang Choi. They can be anywhere from truck drivers, sort of the working class, through to students, engineers, all the way up through to executives and politicians. Basically, every class and creed is accounted for, with the exception of farmers. And I couldn't find out a reason why. This was farmers
don't go for it? Or
I think it's more like
banned.
They're just
sorry, you're a farmer. I'm not interested.
That's my guess. But it's an assumption. I don't know. If anyone Vietnamese out there knows the reason why in 1985 prostitutes aren't sleeping with farmers, I mean, I guess we can guess, right? It's just, I guess they're seen as the lowest of the low, or they're too filthy or something. But no farmers. Farmers are not getting it.
I love the thought of there's this interview at the beginning. It's like, so occupation, farmer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're out.
It's like, damn it! I should have said truck driver. I knew it.
Right, you client. So if you're a prostitute, you want to find a client, you'll go to what's known as a beer hug bar, a biome. These are essentially drinking dens. Picture, small little rooms with loads of plastic white chairs, selling homebrew beer.
Yeah, I don't need to picture that really. That's up in there.
Pale, watery lager. It's like 15 cents, US cents, like for a glass. Yeah, and you just sit there all night. You just like chatting, eating, smoking, eating little barbecue snacks, and having these scantily clad women come around you, serving you the beer that you can negotiate sex with. Now, the Vietnamese at this time, they are prohibited from going into the hotel room of a tourist. So they use small Vietnamese-owned hotels instead that understand if you're taking an international tourist into your room. Obviously, this doesn't matter if your client is Vietnamese. Police raids do happen, right? 1985. It's rare.
But they're coming for the snacks, I would imagine.
Probably. It does happen. They go pretty light on the prostitutes. If they're caught in the act, it can be a fine of about 50,000 dong, which is about $3, so about £1.50 sterling at the time, which I guess was a lot, but given 15 cents for a beer, it's not tremendous, right? It's like a night out.
What's that like? Yeah, that's 100 quid or thereabouts, right?
Yeah. They go less easy on the client. You find you're found with a prostitute, you can get up to 5 to 7 years in prison for buying or selling a woman. But that doesn't prevent sex tourism. So it's a growing business across Asia at this time, 1980s. International travelers are coming to most of Asia, but they're coming to Vietnam especially. They're looking for cheap and safe sex tours. And I say safe because the women are considered to be essentially free of STDs. I don't know where this rumor starts, but there is this rumor amongst sex tourists that the women of Vietnam are less likely to give you an STD. There are gangs that are set up, networks that are organized to obtain virgins. And in many cases, that includes children. They will approach orphanages, impoverished families, try and buy kids and women, or they'll just steal them off the street. It's a pretty rough time for those people that are taken and put into that network. And it seems like at the time, no one's really doing anything about it. They are now. These things obviously are still occurring across the world, but still within Asia. And there are organizations and there are networks that are now set up to try and track and stop and prevent these things from happening. But at the time, not really the case. You got no one coming to save you if you're caught up in this. It's a surprise to me to learn that the first HIV case in Vietnam was only detected in 1990. But from that point, that doesn't mean to say that there weren't others. It was just the first reported case. But by 1992, so 2 years later, 3,000 people got HIV. And today, 230,000. So there is a real epidemic of HIV. I won't go into it now because it's not the period that we're talking about, but you can see the start of something really quite sinister and dark starting to appear in that sex industry at that particular time.
So I mean, this is a tale of the sort of freedoms from the communist oppression.
Yeah.
Opening up opportunities, however unreluctant one might be to view them as opportunities, but still opportunities, but which come at a cost.
They do. And, well, yeah, the cost for those people that are caught, 5 to 20 years in prison. Doesn't seem like a tremendous amount, does it, for stealing and taking people from their home and selling them to people? But that's the penalty that's fixed, 5 to 20 years. Okay, we're coming to the end, and I don't want to leave it on a downer, so let's talk about something a little bit more fun. Let's talk about language. The Vietnamese, coquettish and coy as they are, when they talk about sexuality, they don't talk about it specifically or medically, or using body parts and such. They tend to hide behind euphemisms. So we're going to talk about euphemisms. A man who has a sexual desire, so he's like, you know what? I fancy going and sleeping with a prostitute. What he'd actually tell his friends is, I'm going to go buy a tree.
I'm going to go buy a tree.
I'm going to buy a tree. And his mate might turn around to him and go, I've been scooping water in the rice field.
Which, I want to know, what does that mean?
Well, he's been having sex, so he doesn't need to. He's been scooping water in the rice field.
So is the tree specifically a prostitution thing?
Yeah, I'm going to buy
a tree.
Yeah.
But I'm all right because I've been scooping my own water in my rice field.
In the rice field, yeah. They describe women using food terms. Pete, you were dating that girl last night. I saw you dating that girl. She looked crisp.
Like a bag of crisps?
No, she looked crisp, sticky, spicy. All words that they would use related to food. Yeah. So here's some other food-related euphemisms for you. Let's do a little quiz. What do you suppose the euphemism for a white rice flour pancake might be?
I'm going to say that is missionary sex whilst a third person watches.
That's suspiciously elaborate, that one. It just means a virgin, actually, Pete.
Oh,
so, yeah. Oh, what, her? No, she's a white rice flour pancake.
White rice flour pancake. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to get this next one.
All right. Will you? Okay. What about eating a rice flour pancake?
That is having the sex with a virgin.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
That's exactly right. What about the pulpy and sticky interior of a breadfruit?
Well, I'm pretty sure that is the luscious hair of a woman with whom you have a deep emotional connection.
Well, I mean, that's almost word for word what I've got. Oh, no, wait, it says the vagina here.
Oh, shit. I was going to say vagina.
Yeah, well, you should have done, because that's exactly what the pulpy and sticky juice interior of a breadfruit is.
I mean, it's an inefficient way of going about it. But okay.
You've not done very well out of this, because you've only really got one out of
this next one
these four. This one I think you might actually get. What do you think sucking a honey flambéed banana might be? Have you ever sucked a honey flambéed banana?
That's when you're getting a cramp and you need potassium. But the only banana to hand is flambéed. So
Coated
you
in
suck
honey.
on that. So it's I think it's an athletic reference.
I think we all know what sucking a honey flambé banana is. I don't need to tell you that.
Is your banana honey flambé?
It's sticky. And crisp.
Oh my God, if it's crisp, you probably need to see somebody immediately.
No. Right? See, we're getting into this. I quite like this. Tomorrow,
I don't know
I
whether
am
I'm
gonna go and buy
hungry
a
or
tree.
aroused. This is so confusing to me. It's like, are you ready to go? I'm like, no, I've just phoned Deliveroo.
But it's good. Look, we're talking about this. There's no embarrassment. We're having a good laugh. We're
That is
talking about
true.
this, and that's the point. That's the objective.
Oh, hey Ryan, how you doing?
Oh, mate, yeah, real good. Yeah, really good.
Did you watch Bake Off last night?
No, you know I was out last night, wasn't I?
What were you up to?
I was out, buying a tree.
Oh, you were at the garden centre.
No, I was out scooping water in the rice field.
Was it a country walk or something?
No, I was scooping water in the rice field. You get me?
Oh, what, you got a plumbing problem in your house?
Mate, no, I had my honey flambéed banana sucked.
Oh, you were watching Bake Off.
Yeah, that embarrassment thing extends to the deaf as well, the hearing impaired, as such that, sadly, if you're learning sign language, there are no words for body parts or anything to do with reproductive health. So basically, these young boys and girls are having to sort of just basically express themselves in other complicated mimes. If you're a girl, you've got your first period, you might say, I don't know, I've got colic and I'm bleeding, something like that, or acting out the sexual act. So you're 20s and you're deaf and you're with a partner for the first time and you're trying to initiate sex, you would have to mime out what you were after. You couldn't use words for those things.
Wow. So I'm blown away by this on a number of levels. Number one being that you had to now research how deaf people communicated in Vietnam in the 80s or probably even to this day. Their sexual desires.
Yeah, well, it's one of the many reasons why, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, please burn my laptop should anything happen to me, because my internet search history is not looking very healthy. But yeah, no, I mean, look, the one thing that I think we can guarantee with any of our countries across the world is the minute that you pull the sex card, there's going to be a wealth of information to talk about.
I think you've done an absolutely tremendous job.
Thanks, man.
I mean, I'm blown away that you even got to the point of how does a deaf Vietnamese person in the 80s express their sexual desire. That's incredibly detailed and fascinating.
Like I say, there's a lot of stuff on the internet to do with sex. I recommend looking it up. I don't know if you've used the internet for
definitely
sex.
not going to do that. I will be burning your laptop just because I'm scared for you. But that was really interesting, Ryan. I really enjoyed that. It was very interesting.
My pleasure.
Let us have a look to what we have to do next week.
Desolator. Let's get the desolator out. Doop-a-doop-a-doo, desolator. Right. What do you want to know first? Time, country, or theme?
No, I want to know the country first.
Okay, so the country is Portugal.
Oh, yeah, I'm good with that. I know Portuguese people. I've got connections.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, very good. What do you want to know next? Time or
Time,
theme?
yeah, time.
Okay, so Portugal in AD 300 to 400.
Yeah, which is totally fine.
It is, right?
No, it's not fine,
Come
Ryan.
on, Romans are going on around that time.
Well, I'll tell you next week. Stop speculating.
All right. Well, and the theme is war.
Oh, yeah, war's a universal. I'm fine. At least it wasn't like ecology or something.
Yeah, I don't think we have ecology as a theme.
All right, fine.
The
I
internet.
I can do 300 to 400 war. The internet.
We should really take that theme out.
We had technology in New Way, right? That did not work well.
No.
Right. So war, 300 to 400, Portugal.
That's exactly what you got. Best of luck.
Yeah, thanks for another ancient nightmare.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Best of luck researching it.
Thank you.
Let's get the hell out of here. Let's go eat some honey flambéed banana.
Is that what we want to do? I don't know.
All right, let's go scoop some water in the rice field.
That sounds better, I think, if I remember it rightly. All right, we'll see you guys next week on... History happened everywhere.
Fun fact, did you know that there was a sequel to Good Morning Vietnam that was written and was like at the point of being greenlit before they went, actually that's a terrible idea. It was called Good Morning Chicago.
That sounds awful.
Adrian Cronauer take on, like, I don't know, some sort of court case in Chicago. Yeah. Good morning, Chicago.
That sounds awful.
Yeah.
Right. Can we do that again? Because I've just got an idea for that.